Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Saqib Razzaq, and welcome to Colourful Heritage Part 1 of our weekly 4-part series called Herstory. In this series, I'll be having a conversation with a number of inspirational Scottish South Asian women, taking a closer look into their lives. I'll be finding out more about their personal and career journey and asking them to share some of their unique experiences that they learned with the rest of us. So in part 1, I'd like to introduce my guest this week, who was previously known as Sawarnjit Matharu and is now better known as Sawarnjit Burmi to our friends and family. So Sawarnjit arrived in Glasgow from India with her parents in January 1960 at the young age of 5, not knowing any English when she initially started her primary school. Of course, that changed very quickly. In age just 17, she joined the police force to become Scotland's first South Asian policewoman in 1974. And to this day, Sawarnjit still lives in Glasgow, is married with 3 children. Good morning, Sawarnjit. How are you?
Good morning, I'm fine, thank you.
Welcome to our series, and thank you for agreeing to share your very unique and inspirational story with everyone.
Thank you
Can
for
you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and in particular your journey of being selected initially as a police cadet in 1974? You know, things like what was life like for you and your family in Scotland, particularly your mum?
It was a struggle for that generation because they couldn't speak any English. The children had gone to school, so we could all speak English, but the parents were still very limited. I was schooled here, so my English was okay, and I applied to join the police force because it said, I had seen an ad saying, if you like an exciting career. And my parents weren't very happy about it at first, but I soon managed to talk them round.
So why were your parents not happy about you joining the police? What was the difficulty that you faced?
It's not a female career. It's, to them, they were thinking of way back in India and Pakistan, how it's not looked upon as a career for women. I mean, women are supposed to be like nurses and things like that, and not roaming the streets and fighting.
Right. And what about, I mean, apart from your own family, you know, what about?
We were against it as well because they all thought that's not a female thing to do. That's a male-dominated area. So they weren't very happy, but you can't please everybody.
And so the community as well wasn't very happy, you're saying?
No, not at all.
No. That's another barrier you would have had to come across.
Yes.
So what was it that actually inspired you to join? What did you think you could bring to police work then, in terms of, you know, what did you think you could bring that was special?
I felt that the communities, the Asian communities, were struggling to express what their needs were, and they needed a voice. They needed someone who could help them, that could speak their language, that could help them in any way they could. It was more to be of service to the wider community.
And what kind of skills do you think you could have brought in order to be, you know, make a better service for the community? Also, you being South Asian.
Well, we know that anybody that can speak Punjabi, they can speak and understand Hindi and Urdu as well. So it was that kind of sense that you could help a whole wide community. It wasn't just 1 or 2 areas. It was like a lot of the languages very, very similar. So you would be, whoever would be helping, you'd be helping a great many people. because most of our Asian people couldn't speak much English. It was more broken English.
Okay. And when was it you realised, you know, because obviously you didn't speak much English, you didn't speak any English when you first arrived here, but when was it you first would have realised that, you know, I mean, in your previous interview on our website, you said that you were always in primary school, you felt scared, but by the time you got to secondary school, you know, you were happy, everything's fine, you could speak the language. When was it you realised that you wanted to work? Because even in the Asian community, for girls in those days, we're talking in the 1970s, to work was something not seen as normal. You know, you were asked to finish off and stay home.
Yeah. Well, my mother was, she wasn't educated much. It was just very basic from India, and she couldn't speak the language. She could understand bits, but couldn't speak it properly. So, and she managed to find work. She could sew. So there was a factory that had advertised for women who could sew, and all they needed to do was go in and show them what they could do, how much they could sew. And that was it. And they would come and pick them up and drop them off. So my mother had done that, and without any English, and I thought that was very brave of her to be going out into the working world, being uneducated and not being able to speak their language. But she still took that initial step. And I thought, I want to be helping the wider community any way I can.
Right. Yeah, so there wasn't ever an issue about you working, it was just the type of job. Why do you think then that this particular profession, why do you think it's an issue then with the wider community? I mean, I think I'm asking in terms of for South Asian people, because you don't see many South Asian people in the police, and I mean across the board in UK. So what is it about this particular profession, do you feel, that, you know, maybe South Asians aren't connecting or not going into this profession?
Not so much now, but back then I felt that back in India and Pakistan, it was only people that couldn't get a proper job that joined the police. And they were initially, I don't know if they were educated at all, or whether they were dropouts from school, or how much education they did have. But it was more a thing of, oh, if you can't get a job anywhere else, join the police. So that's the way it was looked upon here as well by the Asian community. It wasn't a case of you need to have some kind of background education.
Right. So I guess you were quite a determined young girl. I mean, age of 17, that's so young for you to then join. And of course you joined as a cadet at the age of just after you 17, so 17 and a half, I think you said. So you weren't old enough to join the police because you had to be 18. Yeah. So talk me through a little bit more about, you know, what was it like being a cadet? What did you learn? Because this is a job which is it's a profession that not many of us take up. So what was it that you learned that was, you know, on the job? What did you do as a cadet?
I was quite fortunate that the cadets was available then. I don't think it's available now. It was an area where you were given 1 month placements, and it was in various areas. It wasn't just in the police. You shadowed. I did a month at the information room, which was where all the calls come in. So you kind of shadowed people who answered these initial 999 calls, and I would have headphones on and listen in to them and see what their answers were. So you were kind of learning as you were going. And one of my attachments was to Gartnavel Mental Hospital, which was also an insight into mental health issues, which I found very interesting. The others were you had to visit like the mortuary and places like that and watch a post-mortem.
Wow.
Which you wouldn't do normally.
I think you had you told me one point.
You had to sit in at court for a month.
That's right.
At the back and take notes and watch how the proceedings went on, and listen into cases and write up. I had to do a report at the end of each month to say what I'd learned and how I found it.
Okay. And obviously you had to learn about Glasgow as well. I think you said you had to know your bearings, so find out, where you were. So
yeah,
sounds really exciting. I mean, especially the mortuary bit. So so you would have to, for a 17-year-old, that's quite a lot to take in.
I found that was quite scary. I used to keep avoiding the mortuary every day. As we walked past, it was beside the Sheriff Court. The High Court was. It's now the Sheriff Court, I think. And we used to, the whole group of us used to walk along and try and avoid it, because we kept saying, we'll go in tomorrow. But eventually we had to go in.
So, I mean, for a 17-year-old, that's quite a lot to take in. So it actually, do you think it sparked your interest to carry on then? You didn't put you off in any way, or did you just go with the flow?
No, it didn't put me off. It was quite interesting. It was the first time I had seen a dead body. I had never seen a dead body before.
So it's learning new skills, and I guess it's quite exciting.
Yeah.
So going back to sort of 1974, when you actually finish your training as a cadet and then you join as the police, so you're now a police officer. What was it? Tell me about what was it like? What did you do on the job?
Initially, it was the City of Glasgow Police, and we policewomen only did missing person reports, caught deaths. We got sent to places where children or women needed to be interviewed. We did female prisoner search, escort to female prisons, things like that. Women did not walk the beat, but then six or 7 months down the line, it changed to Strathclyde Police, and that was when they said, right, all officers will be doing the same duties. And then women were just doing foot patrol, panda cars, everything, same as the men. So we were getting sent out.
And how would you say that your sort of fellow colleagues, how did they perceive you as a police officer? Because firstly, you're a woman, and then secondly, you're South Asian. So how did that fare with your other colleagues?
I felt that the younger constables were a bit apprehensive. They didn't want to be neighboured off with me, because they felt that if they went to a pub fight or something like that, instead of focusing on the fight itself, they would need to be protecting me as well. But I think the older police officers felt we just needed to be trained the same as anybody else.
Okay. So what was it like then for you in terms of working in the sort of 1970s in the force? And what kind of skills did you learn during your training on the job?
Well, when I was up at Tullyallen, I learned to swim, because as a girl, I wasn't allowed to go swimming, and self-defense. It was things like that which girls don't normally, in Asian communities, don't normally go into, or they're not even allowed to learn them.
I guess in those days it was a very different time, so parents didn't really do much in terms of clubs. I think nowadays the scene is very different. Youngsters are doing all sorts of clubs. So you said self-defense. So how long was your course then at Tullyallen?
We did 3 months up at Tullyallen, and then you came back for a year, and then you went back up for another 3 months.
Right, okay.
I believe it's changed now. It's now 3 months initially, and then they don't actually go back up to Tullyallen anymore.
And what about driving? Did you learn to drive on the job, or was that something?
Yes, I when I was during my first 6 months, when women were just only doing reports and things, I had been asked if I wanted to learn anything else, and I put my name forward for driving. So after my first year of probation was over, I was allowed to learn to drive, and that was within 2 weeks.
Right. So sorry, 2 weeks you had, so 2 weeks was the training period you had? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
It was like there was the driver, who was the instructor, and plus 3 learners. So there was one learner in the front and 2 in the back, and you had to speak as to what you were doing and why you were doing it.
Right. Okay.
So you didn't really get a chance to drive all the time. That was the first week, and then you learned simple things like changing a tire and checking tire and basic things. And then the second week was more, everybody got a chance of driving more, and then you just sat your test.
So this was all done while you're working in the police. Strathclyde Police would have arranged for all this for you to do.
Yes.
That's quite a lot of skills that they're obviously investing in youth. That sounds amazing. Sounds really exciting for that kind of age, and also in that time. That truly is breaking barriers.
Yeah, and learning to drive, doing all these different things. It was really good.
Yeah, really good. Learned loads. How long? So can I then ask you, how long did you? Because I know that you stopped at some point. How long did you actually work in the police force for, and why did you stop?
I worked for 5.5 years in the police force. I had to leave because they weren't very family friendly at the time. And when I had my son, I was off on maternity leave. And then I was expecting my second child. So after I had my second child, I had 2 children, and I couldn't go back to full time. I couldn't go back to shifts. And they just asked me to leave because they couldn't accommodate.
So when you say they weren't family friendly, do you mean as in they weren't offering any kind of flexibility or set times of work? What were you expected to do?
I was expected to go back to my old shift work, just the same as I had done before I had the children. So I wasn't. I had asked for an office job, where it would be either 9 to 5 or kind of more standard hours than shifts. And they said there was nothing available and I would need to leave.
Right. Oh, that's a shame, because I guess nowadays things have changed. We've come away quite a lot, and I guess as a woman, you're fighting for these things all the time. You're always wanting to try and improve conditions because I guess given that kind of flexibility, you're still able to do the job. It's just maybe different hours or like a different pattern. So when you say you did shift work, does that mean on like nighttime shift, like night job? What was your shift? What did that involve?
The early shift was 7 till 3. Mainly the 7 to 3 shift was just back then the police did school crossings, checked like chemists and places like that. Hospitals and chemists were patrolled regularly.
Right.
Whereas now it's totally changed. They don't do any of this watching properties and things like that. The more accommodating, the more family friendly, they can now offer better hours, I think. The night shift was 10 o'clock till 7 in the morning. The back shift was 2 till 11 or 2 till 10, depending on how busy it was or where you were located. And then you were also expected to stay on. I mean, you couldn't, if you were in the middle of something and your shift ended, you couldn't just leave, say, right, oh, it's 10 o'clock, I need to go. You had to stay on till whatever time it took. It could take 2 hours, it could take 3 hours, it could be longer.
So you must have, during your time then in the police then, obviously after your cadet, you're in full time now. What kind of hours did you work? And also share with us an experience of, something that you had to go out and deal with, and how did you deal with it? What did you feel when you were dealing with it?
Well, you dealt with anything that came by. So yeah, it was just whoever was in the area. You were when you started your shift, you were located in an area. Say it was like Foot Patrol 1 or Foot Patrol 2. You had a set area, and you just patrolled that area all day throughout your shift. Attended to anything that was local to you. So anything that you were radioed and told, there's been a shoplifting, or there's been a stabbing, or there's been a fight, you just attended that and saw to whatever needed to be done. If it was a stabbing or a fight and somebody needed to go into hospital, you had to phone an ambulance, escort them to the hospital, and sometimes you had to stay with them. You know, it was totally different from what it is now. I don't think it's like that anymore.
Did you not? I mean, just listening to that, I feel quite nervous. How did you feel when you were, you knew these are real life cases. This is not training anymore. How did that make you feel?
When you're young, I think you're more excited because it's not a boring routine. It was certainly very colourful career, because you did not know each morning you went in, or whichever shift you went into, you didn't know what you'd be coming up across. There was suicides. There was, you ended up taking it as you went along. You just had to take what came along.
And so when you're
as you go, so you were learning something new every day, nearly. Apart from the school crossings and checking pharmacies and all that, that was the boring bits. But the exciting bits were that you were doing different things every single day. And because I was Asian and I was the only one in the Strathclyde force at the time, I was then asked to escort drug squad for a period, because they wanted people to knock on the door innocently. I was asked, we were doing a drug raid, and I was asked to knock on this door and kid on I was looking for someone. It was just to get them to open the door. And obviously, if a policeman went up or a Scottish person went up to the door, they might not answer the door. Whereas me, they wouldn't think anything of it and they would answer the door. So I was used.
Wow. So what did I'm just curious now to find out, so now you're on the job, what did the Asian community think of you? When they see you all dressed up coming, did they feel they could approach you for anything? Did you find that, attitudes changed?
Yes, I felt that most of the Asian community would come up and say hello, and they would say, "Oh, very nice to see you. We're so happy to see a young girl doing this." So it was very encouraging, and because it was almost a turnaround from the community not being too happy about it initially, then to see them that they were really happy, because I think they felt that because I could speak their language, they could relate to me a bit easier. So it was like the police was more approachable than not being able to speak to them.
Right. Okay. And I know that along with yourself, there was Mr. Dilaver Singh, who's the first police officer, male police officer in Glasgow region. Did he sort of guide you, or did you feel? I mean, did you know about the fact that he was already a police officer when you applied? Did that help as being like a role model, or was this completely you applied separately, didn't even know? Is there any word in your community about that?
I didn't know at the time when I applied, but when I was doing my cadets training and when I was photographed for all the papers and interviewed for the BBC and all that, he was there, and Mr. Bashir Mann was also there. That's when I learned about them.
That's really good. So when did you then what year was it you left the police force, and then what did you do after then?
I left in 1980, and I joined my family business. So we ran a shop, and then went on to have a post office. just ran the family business for 16 years.
Because I know
it was easier to do flexible hours as and when I just went as and when I was needed, so I could look after my children and run my house.
that must have been a very difficult, or actually, was it a difficult decision? Because on one hand, you've got your career where you are really enjoying what you've learned and you're putting it into practice, and you know that it's helping your community and the community at large, you know, the wider community, you're helping the public. But then you've got to think about your family. How easy a decision was that for you?
It wasn't very easy, but it had to be done at that time. That's what was best for my children. And I hoped to go back to it at some point, but circumstances dictate what happens to you. So sometimes it's not always feasible.
I think one of the fascinating things I think that we find, you know, because obviously myself and my colleagues have spoken to you on other occasions as well, is the fact that you have gone back and retrained, and you're quite determined. You know, you've gone on to do other jobs as well. So you've almost like created your own roles, whether it's, you know, you're volunteering or whether you're working. So tell me more then about life after the police. What else did you do then other than in the family business?
I left the family business and I then did a 6 months course at College of Commerce, and it was older women returning to work, where I learned basic skills on using a computer and going back into like interviewing skills, writing up a CV, things like that. And at the end of that 6 months, while I was doing the family business, I was also working in a surgery, a doctor's surgery, a GP surgery. He opened in the evenings, and I used to go in 2 evenings a week, open the surgery, take out the notes of the people that had appointments, and see to their prescriptions and things. So that was another interest I had, and it wasn't just the family business. You know, I had that on top of that, and I then, after I'd done my course at college, I applied for a GP receptionist post, which I was lucky to get. I was there for 6 years and on the south side of Glasgow. And again, it was the community was mostly Asian in that surgery. After that, I joined the NHS in town, where I'm still there 20 years later.
Right. Okay. Fascinating. So you keep yourself very busy then. So tell me then, you know, so while you were still working at the police, you got married, you'd had a family, and then obviously after that you've then gone to working in the family business and other things. How did you manage to balance your family life with your work? What, you know, in terms of what helped you, how did you manage to achieve that balance?
After the family business, I only worked part-time. I wanted to work, but I didn't want to affect my family life, so I chose to just do part-time. And I'm only doing 2 days a week. I've never not worked, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's been from out of one post into another one to another one.
And did family help at all? You know, did your extended family help?
Oh yes, I lived with my mother-in-law, and I don't think I would have been able to work even in the police, because she supported me very much.
And what do your children then make of this? What do they make of Mum, you know, that she was police officer, and now do they appreciate the fact that, you know, you gave up your career for looking after them?
Yes, yes they do. They did encourage me to go back, and I did try on 2 occasions, but family circumstances dictate what happens. My mother-in-law took ill, so I couldn't go back. Okay. You take each thing as it comes along. Women are very adaptable.
Yeah, I guess we are. So what I'd like to ask you now is a bit more about your time in the police. That as you look back over your time in the police, was there any sort of turning points, events, or experiences that made you think differently about life?
In what sense? What do you mean?
So, in the sense that you're working in the police, right? And anything that made you feel that made you think differently about life and think, that I want to continue. Like, for example, I think you said you went on to work for the NHS. So the fact that you're working already, helping the community at large in the police, was there anything at that point that you felt, right, I want to carry on with this?
Yes. I've always wanted to work where I can help other people. I felt that when I came to Glasgow, there wasn't much support in any shape or form. There was no language centres. There was no community aid. There was nothing available at that time for any community of any background. Whereas now there's so much set up, it's really good. And I wanted to be able to help people wherever I could.
Okay, so while you're in the police, was there any incident during your time working in the police, not outside of that, just during, for example, when you had to attend an incident, any kind of time when you experienced racism on the job, on the beat?
Oh, yes.
What was your response?
Oh, yes. I mean, I know nowadays nobody's allowed to say darkie or black bee or things like that. Mm-hmm. Whereas back then you got sworn at, and it was openly, blatantly sworn at, and it wasn't a lot of people, but you got that little bit of racism come up every so often. They would either spit at you or swear at you for no reason.
How did you deal with that then?
Yeah, these people that do that are illiterate. They're not aware they don't actually think of what they're doing or why they're doing it. I think they just do it because they're not educated. So they need to be educated on, at the end of the day, we're human beings. And although our skin colours are different, we're still human beings. So it's sometimes I feel it's not their fault that they're illiterate in that sense.
So what would you say then? What kind of advice would you offer to youngsters nowadays? Youngsters can get very hot-headed and start to deal with things in a different way. What advice would you give, knowing what you know now, to youngsters on how to deal with racism in today's world nowadays?
We don't actually achieve anything being hot-headed. It's just a kind of spur of the moment thing, whereas you need to look at the bigger picture and think we need to educate these people, make them aware that we are just the same as you. Yes, our skins are different. Yes, we speak a different language, but at the end of the day, we're still same as you.
Okay. So I was looking at some statistics, and I find that even today, I mean, in terms of like the Scottish police, even today, say 3-4 years ago, there's very few people that from a Black, Asian and ethnic minority background that apply to work in the police. I think I've got something like 100, just under 130 people that applied. So there's still not enough people, I feel, coming forward for these kinds of, in this profession, for these kind of roles. What would you say to any non-white youngsters, particularly women, who would like to work in this profession? What would you say? How should they go about this? What can you say to encourage them?
I think in our communities, it's more when you say education for women or education for children, it's engineers, doctors, lawyers, architects, accountants. These are kind of major areas that our Asian kids are manoeuvred into doing by the older community, the older generations. They're not so much encouraged into the fire service or the ambulance service or the police service. And I feel that this is what we need to look at, is no matter which area the children wish to be into, so long as they're happy, they will achieve, nothing is impossible. We can't all be academic. We can't all be lawyers and accountants.
So do you think it's not just the fact that, it's difficult, or maybe they don't know about it, it's the fact that they're just never encouraged from home in these kind of roles?
Yeah, they're not encouraged. And I think that the police are now, the police, fire service and ambulance service are now trying to get more people to apply. But it's the communities also need to manoeuvre children to that area as well.
So what do you think then that the police forces nowadays could do in terms of, encouraging more people from this kind of ethnic background, like, for example, should they provide role models, or, what kind of things should they be doing more? Maybe going into schools, or what in your thinking is the best way to inform people?
Yes, I think they need to do a bit more awareness, like you say, going to schools, having role models and promoting themselves a lot more. Because it's not, I mean, I know that architects and lawyers and doctors don't go into, I don't know whether they go into schools to promote their professions, but it's just, it's not only is it a public service, it's a very rewarding, these careers are very rewarding in the sense that you feel you're helping other people, you're helping our communities.
Yeah. So do you think it's important that they do that then? Do you feel that they should, do you think that the police force needs to be a bit more represented? They need to be a bit more approachable or easy access to their services so people can learn more?
I believe they've started going into temples and mosques and other religious places where they are trying to promote themselves, and they're trying to recruit people in that way, which I find is a very good thing. But it's not, I think they need to do it a bit more openly, have more representation.
Okay.
And maybe educate our communities as well, that these are that women can go into.
I think, like you said, going into the mosques or going into the gurdwaras or the temples.
Yeah.
I remember there was a time in the early 90s when Cardonal College did a course particularly it was aimed at recruiting people from these backgrounds. And I think it was something like a 16-week course at Cardonal College. So they would have various people coming in and doing talks, and then they would put them through a whole fitness process as well. And then I think at the end of it, they did choose people. So I haven't seen that since then. So you're right, they do need to be going out and doing, a bit more in terms of making themselves more aware as a career for the Black and Asian ethnic minorities. I know that in the last couple of years, I heard that even in Scotland, they've now allowed for the hijab, for example, to be worn. So, and also, what do you, I mean, for the Sikh turban as well. So what do you think? Do you think that will help the community to try and, make it feel as though this is a profession that they can do?
Yes, I think the more representation we get, the easier it will be for the children to progress from there. Like you say, it's so encouraging to see a young girl wearing a hijab, because all the other girls can relate to that. it's almost like setting an example, you know, and we need more of that. And we also need our communities to back us more in that sense, especially encouraging girls to come forward.
Absolutely. And I really admire the kind of work that you know, the fact that you did this at a time when there were so few women that were, you know, that were in the police to start with. I think I read that it's only been about 100 years since the first policewomen joined the force. So in 1970s, you were the first Asian policewoman. And even if, I don't know if things have, I think they're getting better. A friend of mine had messaged me to say that she was the 25th firefighter woman female firefighter in 1996, I think it was. So to me, that seems that was in the 1990s. She was only number 25. You know, there's no other females working for the sort of fire department. So for you to be doing this at such a very early, young age, you've had to come through a lot of barriers, and of course put up with, you know, had to have a struggle with obviously the family and community not thinking this is traditionally a job for women for a start, and then not as a respectable job. I think that's what you said, that in places like Pakistan and India, working for the police is not associated as being a respectable job. So I think it's been really fascinating and really interesting to hear your story, and thank you so much for sharing this with us. I hope this conversation has inspired some of our viewers to follow in your footsteps and to, you know, break the mold and to try something new. And also, even if you've got some young mums listening, you know, that you even though you might not be able to do a particular job that you are maybe trained up in, but you can always retrain and change and keep working. You know, you can find ways of doing this, like you said, with family support, and obviously your husband would have supported you as well. I don't think you realise this, but just recently I was told that there's in the Moving Image Archive, they've come up with a resource called Herstory. And in this resource, they have used your film footage that is present in the Kelvin Hall as one of the examples in their resource booklet. And I think that's something that is available on the Scotland on Screen website. So it's amazing that, you know, you are included in these kind of resource pack. It's a real pleasure to have you on. You know, that you're a role model for a lot of the sort of South Asian community. Hopefully people will learn about you more. Just a couple of weeks ago, I did a presentation in which I highlighted the fact that when you became a policewoman, it was just literally a couple of years after when England had their first policewoman. So it shows me that, you know, we're never that far behind. We're right up there. The Scottish community are never really that far. In fact, in many ways, we're pioneering in certain aspects. So it's been really good to have you on, Sawarnjit. I hope you've enjoyed having this conversation. I don't know how much coffee you've had. I've had mine, it's gone cold now. To watch your full interview, if people want to do that as well, we've got it pre-recorded from a different time on the Colourful Heritage website. So if you can just log on there and have a look. And I hope next week to catch everybody at the same time next Tuesday with another guest. So till then, thank you for joining.